Adam, alcoholic.
Ralph, alcoholic.
Ralph, do you want to start or should I do a little recap first?
I think you should recap like we did last
Okay.
week.
Welcome to the people that are here. It's our second or third week into this. One of the things my sponsor had said to me is that the work in AA wasn't really working on myself. It was being rid of self so I could help others. And he also intimated to me that really the work was using the big book as a tool to help other alcoholics to discover the truth about their alcoholism. And in the first 3 weeks, we did the circle and the triangle on the cover page. We described the table of contents. We did the preface where it talks about it being a basic text. All of this stuff is going to be available on the recording so that if you want to catch up anytime or if you miss one of these sessions, you can go back and look at where we've highlighted or talked about highlighting different parts of the book. And all of those are turned into questions. So, do I believe this book has a solution for me? Do I see the phenomenon of craving, the ideas in the doctor's opinion? Can I stop once I start? Can I stay stopped on my own? Am I aware of the phenomenon of craving? And so forth. So all of that is leading us up to Bill's story. One of the ways to look at Bill's story is to ask specific questions about Bill. Did I drink like him? Did I think like Bill? Did I feel like Bill? Was I as hopeless as Bill? Taking golf, World War I, the stock market, even gender out of his story so that we can kind of look at the symptoms of alcoholism, Bill's need to control. And there's some very specific questions that go into Bill's story to use it as a diagnostic tool, which seems to be a common thread with most alcoholics. Those two ideas that he couldn't stop once he started and he wasn't able to stay stopped on his own. Bill goes through 3 or 4 ideas here. One is that fear won't keep him sober. One is that self-knowledge won't keep him sober, that thinking it through doesn't work for a real alcoholic. A lot of these things dispel a lot of the ideas that we hear in AA, like just play the tape through. I mean, I played the tape through to Skid Row and my head tells me Skid Row wasn't that bad. And the same thing as we were talking about with self-knowledge. At the end of the meeting, we say, keep coming back. It works if you work it. We've never said, keep coming back. It works if you know it. So these are going to be some very quick questions up to where we are right now on Bill's story. So if you're just catching up, these were the questions that came out of the first half of Bill's story. And the question was, when I look at my relationship with alcohol, did alcohol take on an important, exhilarating part of my life? Did I drink with enthusiasm? Did I see that in my relationship with alcohol? Did my drinking assume more serious proportions? As I go through that, he talks about control. Did I still think I could control my alcoholism? Do I still think that I can control alcohol or the situations in my life, which is the second half of step 1? And then Bill on page 7, right where we are right now, he talks about self-knowledge and he thinks that self-knowledge will fix it. And a lot of us know that the knowledge is necessary to win the confidence of a new person, where the clergy couldn't do it, where the therapist couldn't do it, where the drug and alcohol counselor couldn't do it, where my parole officer couldn't do it. Another drunk was able to win my confidence because he lived like me. He felt like me. He drank like me. And these same questions that I'm asking of Bill's story, I'm going to start to relate to a person that's sitting in front of me when I take him through the book. So that kind of brings us right back to these questions where we are right now on page 7. So if you want to catch up, you can go back. I think all of that's available on the Blueprint for Recovery Facebook page, and all the audios of this and others are available there. Just so if you want to catch up and you weren't here, you can do that. If you have any questions, we'll have a small portion of time at the end of this that if you're new or you want to, further amplification of this, we can do that for you. So Ralph, do you know exactly where we were? I think it was the last paragraph on 7. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I'm going to go to where it said it relieved me on 7. And whenever I say question mark, that means we're turning things into statements, into questions. I'm not going to stop and go over all of them. But just so you know, when you're reading this book for yourself, did this apply? Is this me? So it relieved me somewhat to learn that alcoholics, that the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, question mark. Though it often remains strong in other respects, question mark. My incredible behavior in the face of desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. And that's as highlighted there, self-knowledge. And there's a lot of questions. Here he's thinking that, okay, self-knowledge is going to fix me. I'm not drinking. And he's bringing out what most alcoholics bring out, willpower. And willpower is like bringing a knife to a gunfight when it goes up against alcoholism, because the main aspect of our disease hammers us when we're not drinking. But it was not. For the frightful day came again when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain. It seemed to me my weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure, delirium tremens, or I would develop wet brain, and perhaps within a year, she would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities and my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was plunged into the dark, joining the endless procession of sots who had gone on before me. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What I would not give to make amends. But it was over now. And there's a lot of questions that need to be answered there. Go ahead, Adam. Want to recap that?
I absolutely do. I think that if you're new, my experience with willpower is that it's going to say it later on page 24 that an alcoholic passes through the region where even the strongest desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. It says our willpower at that point becomes virtually non-existent. And if you're new, just like knowledge, the knowledge is necessary for me to win the confidence, which I said a few minutes ago, and I'm aware of that. The knowledge, when used to win the confidence of a new person, armed with facts about myself, about the craving, about the obsession, about this information in the book, I can generally win the confidence of a new person where no one else can. And if you're new, my willpower, it says marshaled by the will. If I'm using it to go to meetings, to work steps, to help others, if I'm using my will for the specific purpose of recovery, if I'm using it for service, and I'm convinced that, like it said in the doctor's opinion, if I'm willing to follow a few simple rules, and those rules very much like the triangle we talked about, and we're going to hit that in the second half of Bill's story here. Go to meetings, work steps, and help others. If I force that, if I can do those three actions, what happens is somehow I develop this grace not to drink. And we're raining here in California for the first time in a year, and grace is very much like an umbrella. I can stand under that umbrella and I'm safe and protected. But if I stray, like in a relationship, I stray, I pay. And my experience with this is if I adhere, the adherence to these principles, now my willpower and my knowledge, when used for the purpose of recovery, seem to bring about this grace. And that's a really tricky idea to show a newcomer. So yes, Ralph, would you like to continue?
Sure. Here's the beginning of Bill's step one. This is all highlighted. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in a bitter remorse and self-pity. Quicksand stretched all around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Those are a lot of question marks in there. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me up for a bit, question mark. Then I came to the insidious insanity of that first drink on Armistice Day, 1934. I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or I would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted in what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life which is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. And the story is he was on his way to play golf, and a bus got rear-ended, and they had to get off the bus, and he went into the bar, and he was telling the bartender and telling this guy he was with that he can't drink. If he drinks, he's going to go crazy. And the bartender, the Armistice Day came, and the bartender put a shot in front of him, and he drank it, and the guy next to him, the guy he was talking to says, "What are you, crazy?" And he goes, "Yeah, I am." And that was Armistice Day, and Bill didn't get sober till December 11th. So he went on another run for about a month. and ended up in really bad shape. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, that's awesome, Ralph. This piece right here, if you're new, this really is Bill's bottom right here, and there's a transition here of his hopelessness. And if I were to go back all the way through Bill's story and look at everywhere he had trouble and ask myself, I have all of the places that Bill had trouble with alcohol, from that first thing where he drank out of loneliness and how he failed his law exam and how drinking took an exhilarating part of his life. And every one of those pieces I'm using as a question when I'm working with a new person. So here's the beginning of this, and it's very interesting because I have sat at that table, the table that when you go to the museum in Bedford Hills, New York, the guy that takes you through stepping stones, it's Bill's country house. You walk through there, and I've told this before. You go, and he has a seance room and this library, and you walk into the kitchen, and the curator says, "Sit down at the table." And me and my friend sit down at the table, and he walks to the other end of the room, and he says, "Oh, by the way, that's the table." And he doesn't say another word. And all of a sudden, he sees this tear. Like all of a sudden, it overwhelms me. And he starts laughing hysterically. And he says to me, "Well, if you came all the way from Los Angeles to Bedford Hills, obviously you read the story. Everyone does that." And it was really funny because this is the table they brought from Clinton Street to their country home. And it is the table where Ebby sat. So near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. My wife was at work, and I wondered whether I dare hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. We have a saying that the definition of a functioning alcoholic is an alcoholic that lives with someone that works. And that's pretty much where Bill was. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober, in italics. It was a year since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he'd escaped. Of course, he would have dinner, and then I would openly drink with him, unmindful of his welfare. And that, really, you could see Bill's selfishness right there. His total selfishness, his inconsideration. I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. And it's like we say, life had its moments, and for those moments, Bill was willing to give his life. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. It's a really, really powerful, that paragraph right there. And it's really interesting because I never got to hire an airplane to finish a jag when the liquor stores closed in Los Angeles. You know, I could see driving to Vegas, but Ebby, the backstory on this is Ebby was much worse than Bill, or Bill felt he was. And if you've ever noticed, what we say is a picture is better than 1,000 words. And the fact that he knew Ebby so well and he drank with him so many times, and the fact that Ebby didn't want to drink was a very, very powerful moment in the beginning of Bill's recovery. Ralph, do you want to keep going?
Yeah, and I think that it's important that who was your Ebby? I know for me, the very first meeting I was at Turning Point was a Friday night, 2001 in the summer. It was pouring rain out, and a man brought a meeting to me. My Ebby showed up. And did I know him personally? No. But when he shared, and that's the difference. Adam sent me a beautiful article about recovery, that when one alcoholic talks to another, we're talking this way, face to face. It's not like in a thing where the clinical person is up here and we're down here. And he shared it, and there was something about him. And I think when you really read this, you can't help almost get teared up when you start thinking about how Ebby appeared to Bill. Like, what's going on here? Like, what happened to this guy? Where did you leave off?
Right at Drinkers Are Like That, first paragraph on page 9.
Okay. All right. Drinkers Are Like That. Door opened. He stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was explicitly different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what got into this fellow. He wasn't himself. Come on, what's this all about? I queried. He looked straight at me, simply put it, and said, I've got religion. I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little crack about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, right? But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin will last longer than his preaching. And, when we're talking with a guy now, I think it's important for me not to talk about religion, but maybe you could substitute out the word spirituality. He's got that spirituality. And are you willing, to the newcomer, willing to look at this as a spiritual program of action at this point? Because don't forget, the assignment is to figure out what you're not willing to do to recover. And that's one of the questions. But he did no ranting. And a matter of fact, he told how two men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. And he was talking about what happened with Ebby Thatcher in Vermont. He was up there, and he'd gotten some trouble. His family, the short story is his family sent him there and said, Ebby, just get out of Albany, go live up there, and we'll give you some money. You can stay up there at the farmhouse. He'd gotten some trouble. He ran his car into another house and pulled up to the kitchen, asked the lady for coffee, was pretty much on probation with that. And then one day he decided he was going to paint the house. And he went to the store, started painting the house. And after he got about 9 square feet painted, he sat there to admire his work like many alcoholics do. And he sat there and some birds started crapping on the house. So he couldn't have that. So he went and got a shotgun and he started shooting at the birds. And obviously the police were called and he was committed. And this is when Roland Hazard appeared with another gentleman. And because Roland Hazard's family was well-to-do and Ebby Thatcher's family was well-to-do, they released him in his custody, and Ebby got sober. And those are the people who they're talking about to suspend his commitment. Because don't forget, there was no detox, there was no treatment programs there. It was you either went to detox and tried to get well and you battled this thing, or sometimes they would lock you up in an insane asylum for alcoholic insanity. So go ahead, Adam.
Well, I talked about the Oxford group before. They were in 1939 when this book was published. They met at the Hollywood Bowl, which is very close to me. 30,000 people went to that meeting. And although it was a religious idea, they felt that, like we've all heard the word enthusiasm, it means theos, it means God within. And the Oxford group believed there were 4 things that blocked a person from God. And this is what they are. 1, a dubious luxury I will not forego. 2, a secret I will not confess. 3, a restitution I will not make. And 4, someone I will not forgive. And those ideas are parallel. The luxury I will not forego, selfishness. The secret I will not confess, dishonesty. The restitution I will not make, fear. And someone I will not forgive, which is resentment. Those 4 ideas. And they believed when a human being was unblocked of these things, the light of God, or the light of the Spirit for those of agnostic temperament, would shine through them and they would be forever changed. And at that time, they called that a conversion experience. And those ideas are going to be the ideas that we're going to quickly read through in the second half of Bill's story. That will appear on page 13. I think it's really important because they're fundamental ideas, just like there's physical laws of inertia, velocity, centrifugal force. The idea with this is, why wouldn't there be spiritual laws? And Ebby was open to that. And Bill's going to have a big fight against this in the next couple pages. So we will continue.
There's a lot of questions coming up here too. A lot of considerations. He had come to pass his experience on to me. And anytime you see the word if in the book, it's a condition.
Wonderful.
If. Do I want this or not? So here it goes. If I care to have it, ? Are you interested in this, Mr. Newcomer? I was shocked, but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. And again, you heard Adam say it, you hear me say it. Are you hopeless? Was I as hopeless as Bill? He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat still on Sundays way over there on the hillside. There was a proffered temperance pledge I never signed. My grandfather's good nature, contempt of some church folk and their doings. His insistence that the Spears had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. His fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. He's talking about, he's having flashbacks as to the concept of a higher power because his grandfather's input on him in his life. And if you think about that now, when you're talking to a newcomer, if you're a recovered alcoholic, you have a relationship with a higher power. And sometimes the newcomer is having trouble digesting this. They may get swelled up and start to realize, oh my God, I've identified with a lot of how he drank. Maybe this is me, The wartime day in that old Winchester Cathedral came back. And if you remember on page 1 of the story, when he read that, he was inside the church praying, and he never really prayed because he was seeing all kinds of crazy stuff in the world, and he was seeing young men his age die and these horrible things. And, when he went outside, he says, if there's a God, show him, and what happened is he stumbled upon that tombstone. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things, but I was not an atheist. Are you an atheist? Very pure people are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that the universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that the mighty purpose of the rhythm, the rhyme, underlay all. How could there be so much of a precise and immutable law? And Bill did not believe in God in human form. He talked about it in some of his writings back in this day. He had trouble concepting that God, any type of human form. He had a tough time, and you deal with a lot of people in recovery. How could there be a God with this COVID? How could there be a God with these devastating shootings and all this stuff? So there was a battle within. With the ministries and world's religious, I parted right there. When they talked to God personal to right there, when they talked to God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. To Christ, I conceded a certainty, a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. For the rest, I disregarded. And we have half measures written in there, our middle of the road solution towards that spiritual program. Go ahead, Adam.
All the way through this, when I go through this with new people, I look at my fight against God, my fight against organized religion, my view of the hypocrisy that I see in the institution. And, if people have a conflict with that, a lot of this comes out here. And he talks about immutable laws. When he talks about the astronomer, the chemist, the evolutionist, I look at Darwin, I look at Galileo, I look at these immutable physical laws. And just like I said before, I always ask them, and I shouldn't really do this, but why wouldn't there be spiritual laws? Are you open-minded at this point? Because I'm really not here to convince them there's a God. It's not my business to do that. But like it's going to say in We Agnostics, faced with alcoholic destruction or to live on a spiritual basis, it says these are not easy alternatives. And I think just to the extent that someone sees their hopelessness, that same kind of open-mindedness is got to be there. It's like there's a direct relationship between surrender and willingness. These are proportional ideas. You will never see anybody more willing to be open-minded to this than someone that's come off a long, hard run. They'll virtually do anything. And somehow, as Bill goes through this, you start to see that it's like we throw in the towel and then we take the towel back one little piece at a time. And I take my will back and I start to look at the things that block me, because at the end of this line right here, it says, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. If you look at comparative theology, if anyone's ever looked at these ideas, I'm sure some of you have, there's a term called deism, and deism is to believe in a supreme being, but not necessarily that it intervenes in human affairs. It's a different way of looking at God. Like God will steer, but God won't row. And I think that Bill starts to look at this kind of philosophy in that way. It's really, maybe it doesn't really matter, but going through this with somebody, I just hope that I can keep them open-minded. And I will ask them again, are you hopeless? If you look at the very top where Ralph said it, do I want this? Do I care to have this? Am I interested? And then at the bottom, why does my mind suddenly snap shut against spiritual ideas. And then you ended up where? At the wars? Is that where you finished?
Yes, disregarded on the top of page 11. The rest I disregarded. Yeah, the wars. You start at the wars, correct?
The wars which had been fought, the burnings, the chicanery, the religious dispute that had facilitated made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe in the sense the power of God in human affairs was negligible, the brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed to be boss universal, and he certainly had me. I know a lot of people that in my family that had fought in wars came back without, that they'd lost their faith. I think that Bill looked at a lot of those ideas, and you can see his fight against it here. It's very, very important, because a lot of us, when you go to we agnostics, it said most of us have agnosticism. All fear is agnosticism. It's almost part of being human is to have this doubt. So there's a big transition here. And what it is after that big fight, that rant that Bill does from the top of page 10 till this page right here, all that argument, suddenly there's this huge moment in Bill's experience where he says, but my friend sat before me. And he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. So it was almost like all his arguments were set aside because sitting in front of him was a guy that he had drank with that wasn't drinking. That when he pushed that drink over to him, he said, I don't want it. And that was a huge thing for him. And that's really, if you think about it, if you're new, when you come to AA and you see people take anniversaries and you see people take chips and you see the love and the camaraderie, for many of us, that's the beginning of coming to believe. Bill is slowly coming to believe here. And it's subtle. He doesn't realize it. So it says God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Had my human will failed? And then the next one, doctors had pronounced him incurable. I went through residential treatment 28 times. I was incurable. They gave me a certificate. You know what I mean? Society was about to lock him up. I'd been locked up for years. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Another big question here. And Ralph has been doing great at asking these questions. Have I admitted complete defeat? Every one of those right there is very interesting. Every one of those questions is ammunition that is available to ask a new person when you're working with them. I answered every one of those affirmatively. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than he had ever known. Really, really powerful. Do I see that in my life, that I've been taken from the scrap heap of life to a life better than I've ever known? And is that what I'm really doing? Is that the purpose of my life, to reach back in my community with the big book as a tool and use these questions to help another person have that experience? Very, very powerful. Had this power originated in Ebby, in him? No. Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that moment, and that was none at all. It's kind of like Bill's second step there, if you really think about it. But he's coming to believe now. Ralph, you want to continue?
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that this is kind of part where the desperation and hopelessness of this just drinking, if you're in that situation where you are conceding that, yes, I am an alcoholic, that you're screwed, that seeing Ebby or seeing other people when you're going to meetings who have recovered and seeing people smile and seeing people take Kates and seeing people talk and share how they were like and what happened and what they're doing now is the attraction, is the hope that, I hope that if it worked for you, it might work for me. And that's what starts to happen when Bill with Ebby right here, he starts to realize that, that he saw something in him, and he says, it began to look as though the religious, we put the spiritual people were right. If you're in AA now, try not to stay away from that word. If we look to see that the spiritual people were right after all, here was something at work in the human heart which had done the impossible. Bill's ideas of miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. There sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more inwardly reorganized. He was on different footing. His roots grasped new soil. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained vestiges, distaste basically, of my old prejudice, my old ideas. The word God still arose to antipathy or dislike. When the thought was expressed to me that there may be a God personal to me, the feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind of the spirit, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway may be. I have since talked to scores of men who have felt the same way. And if you notice, all those names that he's using for God all begin with a capital letter, indicating that that is God. And this is next highlighted, all this next part. My friend suggested what seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? And that's really cool because, if there's, 67 people on this meeting, there could be 67, ideas of what that higher power is. And AA doesn't try to convince anyone of one specific God, but rather you convince yourself the absolute need for some higher power in your life. And there's a big difference. You go to the Catholic Church, they say, oh, do these penance, do this, do this. You go to the Jewish church, you say, oh, do this. Same thing with Muslim. Here, it's none of that. We have 12 spiritual principles, which will bring you to your God. And it's kind of funny because if you look back, you kind of picture Bill and Ebby at that table in that house sitting there, and Bill's probably half in the bag, and Ebby's probably just like, you know what, Bill, why don't you just choose your own conception of God? And okay, I could run with that, And here it is. This is the second step consideration right here. That statement hit me hard. It melted the ice. All right, we're going to pause for a second. Adam, seventh tradition.
Yeah. Did our host have an announcement about the seventh tradition now? Or is that going to be Rodney?
Rodney, do you have the PayPal account and everything up there, love?
Yeah, I just picked.
You're muted.
Oh. There we go. Hey, friends. We will also be posting a PayPal account into the chat in lieu of the seventh tradition in order to support the various levels of AA and service. You may donate via PayPal or by transferring to the email address that's provided there.
Thanks, Francis.
Okay, guys. All right, so continuing on midway through page 12, I stood in the sunlight at last. This is all highlighted, people. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. So the question is, do you want that? And are you willing to believe at this point? Are you willing to look at door A, alcoholic death, or door B, are you willing to try and look for some other sort of an alternative that doesn't include, willpower and try and follow what we're doing here in this program? Go ahead, Adam. I know you wanted to cover this part.
Well, no, I think that from the top of page 12, it's really important to see Bill had a kind of an oppositional defiance disorder to authority. And if you really look at the pronouns for God, all of which are capitalized, every one of those labels implies a difference. And if you really look at it, like the universal mind, the spirit of nature, which is for some people, it might be, you hear people say that it's the ocean. You have the creative intelligence, but look what it says. It says, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens. So Bill hated the idea of a controlling God. And if you look, what I was asked to do is to take a highlighter and go through this section and also go through we agnostics, because you're going to see again a number of pronouns substituted for God. There's actually, you can look it up on the internet, other words for God, and you will see, God is love, God is all these things, and every one of those has a different connotation. And it's really, really great. I mean, I know a lot of us have certain specific ideas, but there's a lot of people that come to Alcoholics Anonymous that come from, there's many roads that lead to Rome. And the fact that we're open-minded and this broad hoop is available to everybody gives people ideas as to what that might be for them, because we do not want to exclude anybody from this, especially it being a matter of life and death. So that was something that's really, really powerful. And I was asked to really look at that. So continuing, is that where, are you at thus right now, Ralph?
Yes.
Okay. So all the steps, if you are kind of aware of this, you're going to hear all the steps in the next 2 pages. And then he's going to talk about the other 2 sides of the triangle. Really, all 3 sides of the triangle, and I'll point them out as we go through Bill's story, are going to be hit here. Meetings, service, and steps, all 3. So this is the beginning of it right now. Thus, I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. And do I want God in my life? There's the question. As long as I saw, I felt, I believed, scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. So that was Bill's fight against God. Suddenly he becomes open-minded to it, right here. A new world came into view. The real significance, again, 3rd time he refers to the experience at the cathedral burst upon him. Okay, this was a visceral thing that happened. It was something that he felt at that cathedral, which a lot of us have experienced at different times in our life. The presence of God. Okay, for a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There I had humbly willing to have him with me, and he came. But soon his sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors. You're going to hear that word a lot. It's also like calamity, worship, and pomp on page 55, the things that block us from God. They're very, very specific. When we get to 55, those are the 3 fundamental ideas that block us again. Most of them within himself, the internal and external forces that block a human being from a power. And as we go through those, you'll start to see how that blocks us from true freedom. And it's both sides of that. And so had it been ever since. How blind it had been. And this is at the hospital, okay? Towns Hospital, 3rd time. I was separated from alcohol for the last time. This was the beginning of his recovery. This was it. And that was December 11th, 1934. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremors. So the guy who had physical addiction to alcohol. And here's his 3rd step. There I humbly offered myself to God, just like the 3rd step prayer, as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. Can I do that? Can I offer myself? I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. Can I do that? I admitted for the first time that I was nothing, that without God I was lost. It's really, really powerful. I came to that. In my hopelessness, I fought this thing. I believed in a punishing God, a condemning God. I believed in a Santa Claus God. I had all these different ideas until I got to the place where I was standing at my own grave. And like I got to AA the day before I died, and suddenly I became as teachable as Bill. And if you're new, that's the question. Could I be open-minded to this? And if you can't believe in the results. Look at the results of AA. Look at the people with long-term recovery that have great lives, that have relationships that work, that are able to navigate around the drama. If you can hold on to those results, just like the wind, I can't see it. I can't sometimes even prove it, but I can see the results of it. So it says, I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away. These are steps 6 and 7 here. The word sin is an archery term. It means to miss the mark, by the way, if you trace the word back. And the word sin is very much what he used as shortcomings and defects. Okay? To have my newfound friend, capital F, not Ebby, God, take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since. So this is the really the beginning of, and he's going to talk about 6 and 7 again in the next paragraph, but 6, doing things that I shouldn't do, and 7, not doing things I should. 6 is doing things that are causing me pain and shame, and 7, not doing things that are opening the door to freedom. And there's a lot of different ways. It wasn't that Bill lacked word power. 6 and 7 are distinctly different. We'll talk about that when we get there. Ebby, you want to, continue? Hey, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, and I love the term when we use the archery term, because when you read it like that, I recently faced where I had been missing the mark. You're omitting the defect. So when you throw that word in there, it really clarifies it. Um, I was to test, or my
My
schoolmate,
schoolmate visited me, right?
and I fully equated him with my problems and deficiencies. 4 and 5. We made a list of people who I had hurt or to whom I felt a resentment. That's step 8. I expressed a willingness to approach these individuals to admit my wrong. Obviously 9. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to my utmost ability. I was to test my new thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I pray for myself, except for my request to bore my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter a new relationship with my Creator. That's a promise. That is a promise. When these things are done, I enter a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements and the way of living which answered all my problems, not just the drinking problems, but all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. And here's it talks about another requirement. Simple but not easy, a price had to be paid, and meant the destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn all things over to the Father who presides over all of us. And that's a lot right there. It covered step 10 and 11, because now we've tapped into this power where we have, in step 10, common sense would thus become uncommon sense. The old way of thinking is replaced with the new way of thinking, and a clear-cut way how to pray, because my old way of praying was, God, please don't let her be pregnant. God, please let me get out of this and I'll never do it again. We're different types of prayers. And when we talk about step 11, it talks about praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. Not only the knowledge, but the power to carry that out. When I'm not blocked and I'm really tapped into this power, everything's good. And I just want to digress for a second, especially maybe touch to some people who have been around for a while. If we're on this path going this way, just say a true north 0, 0, 0, and I get off course just like 5 degrees, and I don't get back on course, at the end of a month or 2 months, you're nowhere near where you want to be. And sometimes in incremental parts, this disease starts to attack us because we go to sleep in recovery. And this is where it happens with that prayer meditation and not staying current. And when we have we have the program here, way of staying current. So it says, go ahead, Adam.
No. I just, like when he says my problems and deficiencies, what I wrote above that is commission and omission, because that comes from the religious idea. Sins of commission and omission. Things I do that I shouldn't. Again, things that I don't do that I should. Those are where those 2 Oxford group ideas come in there. I mean, you can see it all the way through here. The list, the step 8, the 9th step right there. And then the 10th step was to test my thinking. It's very interesting because in the big book, when you get to step 6, right before step 5, when it goes to the 5th step in the first paragraph in the 6th chapter, it says, admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our defects. You can look it up. It doesn't say wrongs. So he's testing his thinking to look at where he has these defects that he's just talked about in step 6 and 7. It's really, really powerful, because each of these, again, can be turned into a question. Like you said, what am I not willing to do here as I go through this? So, I mean, really, you could see all the steps up to here. Okay, do you want to continue, or should I go with these were revolutionary and drastic proposals?
Up until this point, there's probably a lot of stuff that you're not willing to do if you're not convinced that you're an alcoholic, because the only reason why Bill was convinced here is because he was hopeless. He had been beaten down by alcoholism that he became willing to try this. It talks about it on page 28. It says, we saw it with the desperation of a drowning man. A drowning man. What first seemed to be a flimsy turned into the powerful hand of God, because you're screwed. Basically, step one is you're screwed. And if you're just going through the book with a sponsor up until this point, you didn't cover a lot of stuff 30 to 43, with the with the mental insanity that leads up to the first drink and a lot of other stuff. So it's okay. There should maybe be stuff highlighted here, what you're not willing to do if you're just going through this book for the first time and, you're new. Those are revolutionary, drastic proposals. But the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. My book is so highlighted, I'm having trouble reading it. It's all like highlighted and writing all over it. There was a sense of victory that followed on such a peace and serenity that I had ever known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through, and God comes to most men gradually. But his impact on me was sudden and profound. This is the spiritual experience that he had in the hospital. And we're so lucky that we're here today, because when this happened, he called Dr. Silkworth in the next paragraph, and Dr. Silkworth said, Bill, you better go with this, because he saw the condition that Bill was in prior to this and how bad he was. But just to think of Bill, he said, don't worry about that. Here, take this pill, take this Valium, go back to sleep, take this. We might not even be sitting here tonight. But Bill had something happen to him when he reached out for God, and he was desperate enough. He was willing to believe, and he did the program of action that he had this profound spiritual experiences. Mine was much more gradual. I know some people that have had this type of situation. It's not my experience. For a moment, I was alarmed. I called my friend, a doctor, and asked if I were sane. He listened and wondered as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, something has happened to you, and I don't understand, but you better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were. The good doctor now sees many men who had such experience. He knows they are real. While I lay in the hospital bed, the thought that came, there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what I had been freely given to me. Perhaps I could help some of them out. They, in turn, might help others. And if you just look 7 pages prior, let's see, 7 pages prior, on page 7, here he is on the bottom of page 7. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to be. My weary and despairing wife was informed it would be the end. Here he's full of self-pity and all kinds of stuff. 7 pages later, really 12 steps later, he has a spiritual experience and he wants to help the world. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessary of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly, it was imperative to work with others had he worked with me. And I always ask that question, are you willing to read this book and take people through the steps when we're done going through this? Faith without works is dead, he said, and how imparably true for the alcoholic. For if the alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice with others, he could not survive certain trials and low spots ahead. If, condition, he did not work, he would surely drink. And if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith without works would be dead indeed. It's just like that with us. And the bottom line is everyone on a Zoom call is going to have some trials and low spots in your life. And here we have a program of action that enables us to get through things together and a way to live. Adam? No, that was December 11th to December 18th, by the way. He did the steps in those 7 days.
Okay, so you see on the bottom of 14 where it says that we demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. That's as pretty obvious that that's the 12th step. The next paragraph where it says Lois and I, what I wrote here, and this is the beginning of service. We've talked about the steps, and you're going to see the other 2 sides of the triangle. Lois and I, my wife and I, abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution to their problems. And the question was, am I willing to abandon myself with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution? That's the point of the exercise. That is now, having had this awakening that Bill had, am I willing to carry this message to other alcoholics? It transitions perfectly into this. It's very interesting. It says here, it was fortunate for my old business associates to remain skeptical for a year and a half, during which time I found little work. I always stop there with new guys and I ask them, why would it be fortunate? Why would it be fortunate that he found no work? And, we have a men's group of like 400 guys, and we always say that, I've heard Sandy B talk about it. A guy will come in and he'll say, I got a drunk driving, and he'll get a standing ovation. And, then he'll say his wife hit him with a frying pan, and people will start applauding and clapping. And then he'll say, and I got a promotion at work, and you'll hear everyone go, oh, and they'll sigh, because what we say is what's worse for a newcomer than bad luck is quite often good luck. And Bill says it right here. To my fortune, my old associates remained skeptical. Okay, during which time I found little work, because had Bill got a really big deal in his early recovery, it may have distracted him from these fundamental spiritual ideas and this idea of abandoning self with enthusiasm to helping others. I was not too well at the time, and I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. Have I been plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment? Absolutely. And how did I conquer it? By working with new people. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink. But I found is when all other measures fail, this sounds exactly like the first paragraph in the 7th chapter, where it says nothing ensures immunity from drinking more than intensive work with others. You can see that Bill carried this right into that first paragraph. Work with another alcoholic would save the day. Okay, this is hope. Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It's a design for living that works in rough going. Very, very powerful. You're starting to hear now the steps, and you're starting to see that service is another part of the solution. If you're new, this might be the piece that's missing. Again, they always ask me, how free do you want to be and what's blocking you? So if this might be something I wasn't willing to do. Ralph?
Right. And you notice it doesn't say call your sponsor. It says find an alcoholic to work. I have that written there. It said it does not say call your sponsor when he felt these waves. It says find an alcoholic to work with. The next paragraph really talks about the fellowship and the joy of living. It talks about in the bottom of that paragraph, business and professional men have regained their standing. This is scarcely and any form of trouble or misery which has not been overcome among us. This all promises. And one Western city is reminding us that there are 1,000 of us and our families. We meet frequently so the newcomer may find the fellowship they seek. At the informal gatherings, we may often see 50 to 200 people. We are growing in numbers and in power. And there's an asterisk there. In 2015, there's 115,000. I think now we're up to 144,000. And alcoholics in the cups is an unloving creature. Our struggles with them are various and strenuous, comic and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. And that's Bill C. And he committed suicide by putting his head in the oven, for all the history buffs. There is, however, a vast amount of fun all about it. I suppose someone would be shocked at our seemingly wordless and levity, but beneath it, there is a deadly earnesty. Faith has to work 24 hours a day through us or we perish. Most of us feel we need to look no further for utopia. We have it with us right here and now. Each day, my friends, simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Bill W., co-founder of AA. It's powerful. And I picture me being at that place in Bedford, New York. It's the same thing. You get so emotional. We're just so lucky to be here today on this Zoom call, considering all the different stuff and helping each other stay sober. And I'm so grateful that I'm excited about being sober for as long as I am and wanting to help people. And I got a new guy on the phone, on this call now. And when we read that part about good fortune, because I said, it's a good thing that I'm not going to put him out there. It's a good thing that this, and this didn't happen. He says, why is that? I said, because we probably wouldn't be talking right now, and that's the truth. You guys have any questions before we wrap it up?
My last question, Ralph, was at the very end of this. I say, can I multiply and widen this circle? That was the question they asked me after it talks about the widening of the circle. Can I do that? And the last thing was that last thing on the page 15. We meet frequently so newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. So the purpose of meeting isn't so much for me. I'm meeting so newcomers have a place to come. Now look at the motivation there. It's very different. They're meeting with a purpose. And the purpose is so newcomers find the fellowship they seek. The assumption is, like in a vision for you, abandon yourself to God, give freely of what you find, clear away the wreckage of your past, and then join us. people typically went through a lot of the work in the steps, and then when they came to the meeting, they had a solution so that when they met a newcomer, they could walk them through this process. They weren't coming to the meeting looking for the solution. They had somebody that would take them through the process, and then they would come to meetings looking for new people. Very different approach to AA. So thank you guys very much. If there are any brief questions, I think they might be in the chat. And then hopefully we'll see you guys next week. There is a solution. It's very, very powerful.